are we going to see a much more isolationist world and a lot more protectionist policies? Are Trump's tariffs like the first in a wave of people trying to make self-sufficient, or to a greater extent self-sufficient economies? And is that going to lead to some sort of global conflict, or will it continue to be, in your thinking, more likely to be like skirmishes, essentially, like little small flashpoints, like we saw through the whole Cold War?
Well, first of all, on the last point, nobody knows. We have to wait and see. But wrapping that all up in one answer, if I can, it's very clear, and I predicted this back in 2019 in a paper I wrote called The Age of Rage, that you would see this move towards populism and right-wing populism. There would also be parallel left-wing populism, but it would lose out electorally compared to right. I won't go into the methodology I used, but it was fairly clear to me at the time that that was going to emerge as a global phenomenon. And that's pretty much the case everywhere. And again, even in the global south, in countries that we don't mention, but they have people who vote too, or they have people who don't vote, but they have political systems which still have differences within them. And you've seen exactly the same kind of trends, either on the far left or the far right, emerging there. So where does it go from here? Well, on one level, you can say this is all just about culture. And I don't want to talk about that, but we're very aware of the culture war. And it is absolutely tied up in this. It's silly to ignore it, but that's not my talking point here. Where we have traditional politics, which you were talking about your frustration with, and let's use the UK example again. And again, it applies in so many places. You have the traditional post-World War II model, which is you have the left, where you're supposed to pay more taxes, the rich pay more taxes, the state plays a larger role, and then everything works out okay. Except we've seen again and again that actually the bureaucracy can become so inefficient that that doesn't actually achieve any goals, and the rich move their money offshore, and therefore you actually end up with less revenue and things go badly wrong. So there's both the case and the counter case for that. Or you have the more Thatcherite vision, which is, hey, let's cut the size of the government, or let's cut taxation. The private sector will step in. Yes, the private sector will step in and produce things like OnlyFans and gambling shops, for example. And is that really actually providing, the picture that you thought you were going to get? Probably not. Then you get a bridge. I think instead of this left-right, which is two-dimensional as far as I'm concerned, in the contested environment we live in, again, you have to go up to the apex of a triangle and make it three-dimensional, which is where you get to mercantilism. Actually, it's neo-mercantilism, because original mercantilism is hundreds of years old and worries about the fact that money will flood out of the country, and money is gold or silver. And if money leaves because you're buying from abroad and the money goes out, then there's no money at home. No one has any money to pay any debts, and everything collapses. Neo-mercantilism substitutes gold and silver for stuff. You need to be making stuff. Countries that make things and manufacture things have stronger societies and stronger bones. That's the neo-mercantilist view. You don't rely on other people to control the ships that bring you things and then say, we're not going to collect your harvest, let it rot unless you sell it at a low price. They're not going to say, we're the only ones with rare earths or oil, and if you don't do what we want, you can't have it. And how familiar are these themes, right, in the past couple of years? So you have to try and diversify what you sell and what you buy to be as resilient as possible. And you have to try and produce as much at home as possible. Now, that's where I think we're heading. The politicians who see that first, the tip of this triangle, maybe it becomes a rhombus and they go down to the culture and up to the economy too. If you only go down to the culture, you actually don't have any answers either. You might do well for one cycle, but you won't do anything in the economy. If you go up to also understand, no, we have to go to neo-mercantilism, guess what? That does involve tariffs. Guess what? That does involve changes to how you do trade. Guess what? That involves subsidies. Guess what? That involves picking winners and losers. That's lots of left-wing stuff, and it's lots of right-wing stuff too. And it's asking the question, what is GDP for? Who are we doing it with? Who are we not doing it with? Why? Why not? Lots of questions flow from it, and they're existential ones. So the politicians who get there first, and of course, in any collapsing system, the first ones to suspect there might be money or power in something different are the opportunists. Your boring grey technocrats only understand boring grey technocratic processes and systems. They're Clive from accounts, or Susan from HR. They're not the people who understand that things are changing. These are the people who are emerging politically now. We'll see if they can go down, as I said, and up and form that rhombus. And if they can, we're in interesting places. If they can't, they will fail. The next iteration of leadership eventually will. But with a ticking clock, because other countries might get there first, And then you have a much worse position to be bargaining within. But let me bring that back then to the last point. Does this end up with clashes or a World War III? It could be either, depending on who does it where, how, when, and how the others react to it. It could be a really, really bad global clash. It could be, absolutely, particularly between countries that are used to winning by selling a lot, exporting a lot, and countries who say, we're not going to buy your stuff anymore. Europe, for example, loves to say it's a free trader, and it runs a trade surplus. Isn't it amazing how a bloc, which is a free trader, always seems to sell more than it buys? And when you turn around and try and do a trade deal where they have to import more than they export, they fight it tooth and nail. Whereas the UK, which is also a free trader, but is now flirting with industrial policy under Labour government, runs a huge trade deficit with the rest of the world. So there's some great disjunctions here in between understanding what you say you want and what you're actually doing. But I can tell you, if you look at the history of neo-mercantilists, while there are dangers there, and I never underplay them, there is also the possibility of a global accord. Everyone understands this system does not work. Newsflash, it doesn't. This system needs to change. Newsflash, it does. It doesn't work just to go purely to the left. It doesn't go purely to the right. It doesn't work to go purely to the right. It doesn't work purely to go to a culture war. It needs to go to all facets of this rhombus at once, with the best of all of them, asking that question, what is GDP for? And my concluding remark here is you'll never guess who came out and said the same thing in the op-ed pages of the Financial Times 2 weeks ago. None other than the CEO of BlackRock, that tiny little socialist firm, BlackRock, Larry Fink, who said globalization is over. We need a new variant, a new phase, which will be pro-worker with local circulation of capital, which means by default, you don't have big surpluses and big deficits. You don't have big transfers of money internationally, and you have much less inequality domestically. It must be a nestled or a nested set of balance sheets like that. That's about as revolutionary as you can get. And it came from the mouth of Larry Fink.
Yeah. Well, I would suggest that they're maybe hoping to be the landowners of everything to which they rent it back to us in this new wonderful, neo-market.
I have no comment. no comment. I'm merely arguing that these changes are happening.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to get any more opportunistic than a big Wall Street firm, right? Except for maybe a great white shark with blood in the water. So let's be, and I mean that as both criticism and compliment that they're good at what they do. But if they're smelling that political change, there's potential political change in the air. And again, let me just say to everyone listening / watching, ask yourself that question: what should GDP be for? And think of it. And what then? And what then? And what if they do that? It doesn't take that long. You go to some interesting places when you start sketching it out on a piece of paper with a pencil. If you get a good idea, share it. Share it with you, share it with me. We'll pass it on. But if everyone does that, you might be surprised how you can end up with answers which can take us to some really good places as well as some really bad ones. And that's no bad thing.
Good news, everyone. My book about GameStop, the craziest story ever told, is now finished. Well, almost. Still waiting for the final draft. So, in the meantime, I think you should look at pre-ordering it or any one of the multiple fantastic, beautiful t-shirts that I have designed in order to sell with the book. Thank you, everyone, for your patience over the last few years while I have been finishing it very slowly. And I am really, really excited for people to read it. Link is in the description below. Enjoy the podcast.